The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The silence after the end of something enormous has a specific quality. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of held breath, the world pausing in the space between what was and what comes next, uncertain which way to fall. That silence sat over Grimmauld Place like a hand pressed flat against a drum. The street outside was dark and muggle and entirely unaware that the architecture of the century had just changed. Inside number 12, Bellatrix Lestrange stood in the drawing room and looked at the tapestry. She had not turned on the lights. She did not need them. She knew this room by the quality of its dark, the specific weight of it, the smell of old magic and older furniture, and the persistent damp that no spell had ever fully convinced to leave the north wall. The tapestry was there, silver thread on black velvet, stars and names and the ruthless record of 8 centuries of the House of Black. Several names were scorched away, the burns bright even in the dark, because Black family magic did not fade quickly. It made its marks, and it kept them. She was not looking at the scorched names. She was looking at the loose hearthstone. Her mother had told her about it when she was 14. Her grandmother had told her mother. The instruction passed down through the female line like everything that actually mattered in the Black family. Quietly, precisely, woman to woman, in the hours before dawn, when the house was still. If the line is threatened, if there is nothing left, if survival requires it. Bellatrix crouched and lifted the stone. The lapis visionem nigri sat in the hollow beneath it, exactly as described. Polished volcanic glass, the size of a fist, set in silver engraved with the constellation maps the family had used as a naming system since the Middle Ages. It was warm. She had expected cold. She picked it up with both hands and looked into it. The stone did not show pictures. It showed weight, the specific gravitational pull of probable futures. The way certain outcomes bent the river of possibility toward themselves through sheer accumulated likelihood. She felt the first future before she saw it, the Longbottoms, the Cruciatus, the white room in St. Mungo's where 2 people who had done nothing wrong sat and stared at walls for the rest of their lives. She felt Azkaban after that, not as a place, but as a duration. Gray years stacked on gray years, Dementors feeding on everything that made her who she was, until what remained was only the performance of herself, thin as paper. She pulled away from that current. Found the second. The Dark Lord's return. Reward and recognition. Victory. She looked at the victory as long as she could stand it, and what she found at its center was ash, the Black family tree, reduced to its trunk. The last name on the tapestry scorched away not by disappointment, but by a Dark Lord who had taken everything they ever gave him and found it insufficient and taken more. Tom Riddle's face surfaced in the stone's depths, not the magnificent terror she had devoted herself to, but the boy underneath. The orphan, the construct who had learned to wear power like a mask, and had worn it so long he had forgotten there was nothing underneath. She set that current aside and found the third. It was barely there, a whisper at the edge of the stone's range. She pressed toward it and felt fragments rather than images. Ivy on stone walls, the smell of heating potions and old books, a table covered in texts, and a small hand tracing the differences between wand cores with the methodical focus of someone who has decided, at age 4, to understand everything. 3 children. Morning light. And then she felt something else. A shadow threaded through one of the children like a wire of cold iron through warm wood. A dark frequency she recognized because she had spent more than a decade within arm's reach of its origin. It was Tom Riddle's magic. A fragment of Tom Riddle's soul embedded in a child, anchored there by the violence of a rebounded curse that had nowhere else to land. She pulled the stone away from her face. Her breathing was unsteady. She noted this, catalogued it, and sat with it for exactly 45 seconds. The fragment could not be removed by any ordinary means. She had read enough about Horcruxes, from the Black Library's restricted collection, from whispers in the Dark Lord's inner circle, from sources she had spent years cultivating with the patience of a woman who understood that information was the only form of power that compounded. To know that a soul fragment embedded in a living host was not simply a lodger to be evicted. It could only be destroyed by its maker, by Tom Riddle's own killing curse cast at the vessel it occupied, which meant the vessel would have to survive it. There were two ways a person survived the killing curse. One was being the love-anchored sacrifice, which was how Lily Potter had managed it, and that avenue was closed. The other was being the curse's intended target while the caster's own body carried the magical blood of the target, the paradox of the ritual that would eventually be Tom Riddle's attempt at immortality, becoming instead the mechanism of his defeat. The logic assembled itself with the clarity of something that has always been there, waiting to be read. She needed Tom Riddle to come back. She needed him to use Harry's blood in the resurrection ritual. She needed him to cast the killing curse at Harry while Harry's blood lived in his veins, making him incapable of ending what his own resurrection had once incorporated. And she needed every other anchor destroyed before that moment, so that when Tom Riddle cast at Harry, when the fragment in Harry dissolved and Harry lived, there would be nothing left for Tom to fall back on. It was the most elaborate plan she had ever built. She picked up the blood medium from the Hearthstone shelf and did what needed doing. The blood from her palm was one precise cut, no hesitation. The words were in Old English, old enough that they predated the Ministry, predated Hogwarts, predated the entire institutional framework that had categorized her as a criminal, while men like Bartemius Crouch had remained respectable. She felt her magical signature collapse. Not die, collapse like a fire becoming a coal. The full depth of her magic retreated to a point. It would take a year to return. She had planned for a year. She contacted Narcissa through the family mirror, and Narcissa's face appeared looking like a woman who had been awake since well before midnight, waiting for the world to either end or reveal its new shape. The conversation took 9 minutes. When it was done, Narcissa's face was white, and her hands were trembling slightly, and she had asked only one real question. "Will he be safe with you?" Narcissa said. "Safer than anywhere in Britain," Bellatrix said. "Safer than Lucius's house. Safer than any arrangement Dumbledore makes with strangers. Safer with me than anywhere that does not know what I know." It was not comfort, it was assessment. What she did not say, and did not need to, was that she was talking about Draco's future in a world where the Dark Lord might return, where every Death Eater's family would become a liability, where Lucius Malfoy's choices would define his son's options before his son was old enough to choose. Narcissa understood all of this without having it enumerated. The intelligence was always there behind the devotion. She accepted. She went to Godric's Hollow. The village was the specific quiet of a place where something enormous had happened, and the people inside it did not yet know. Smoke still rose from the ruin of the upper floor, dark against a sky that was very clear and very cold. The stars were out. Bellatrix noted, with a detachment that was its own kind of feeling, that the constellation for which she was named was directly overhead. Hagrid was in the street, sitting on a motorcycle that belonged to someone else. Sirius's, she recognized it. Holding a child who had survived something no one had expected him to survive. He looked up when she landed, and his expression moved through several stages in rapid succession. "My name," she said, "is Bellatrix Black. That child has black blood through Dorea Paterna Black, which makes me his nearest surviving magical relative with right of fosterage under the family continuance charter. I have documentation." What followed was not a dramatic confrontation. Hagrid said Dumbledore and orders and can't just. Bellatrix said documentation and blood law, and you are welcome to take this to the Wizengamot, where I will win. And she said all of it in the level, unhurried tone of someone who has already done the preparation and is simply waiting for the other party to arrive at the conclusion. What moved Hagrid, in the end, was not law. It was the moment she took Harry from him. She checked the scar, which had stopped bleeding but was still angry red against the small pale forehead, adjusted the blanket, which had come loose on one side, and settled the boy against her shoulder with the practical efficiency of someone who understood the weight of what they were holding. The hold was not tender, it was correct. It communicated, without words, that the person doing it saw a child rather than a thing. Hagrid let her take him. She transfigured a piece of bark from the ruined garden gate into something functional enough to carry a letter north, and sent it with a note that read, Albus, the boy is with family. You will hear from our lawyers. Then she rose, with one child on her shoulder and one already waiting in France, and turned south. She did not look back. The plan had a name now, in the part of her mind where she kept things she was not prepared to write down. She called it the Third Current. And she was going to spend the next 14 years building it into a flood. The chateau outside Lyon had been in the Black family's continental holdings for 3 generations, mostly unused, the kind of property that existed in family inventories as proof that the family had once been important enough to own more than they needed. Bellatrix made it functional in 6 weeks. Functional, then livable, then something considerably more. Draco was already there when she arrived with Harry, having been fetched from Wiltshire in the previous hour, and installed in a traveling basket she had charmed for the purpose, one small fist curled under his chin, still warm from Narcissa's arms. Harry, awake and watching the world with the luminous attention of a child who has survived something he cannot name, looked at the sleeping boy for a moment, and then looked at Bellatrix. She looked back. He did not cry. She noted this. Filed it. Rodolphus Lestrange, who had not been part of any calculation she made that night and would not be part of any calculation she made after it, was apprehended 2 weeks later with the remaining members of the group responsible for what had been done to Frank and Alice Longbottom. He received a life sentence. Bellatrix filed the Blood Widow claim on the Lestrange vault before the sentencing was formally recorded. Grimgold Ashbane, who handled the claim with the precision she would come to rely on for the next 14 years, processed it in 11 days. The Helga Hufflepuff Cup Horcrux was in the vault. She recognized Tom's fingerprint on it the moment she inventoried the contents. The same dark frequency she had felt in the seer stone. The same cold iron wire, living in gold like an infection in something beautiful. She sent it to Ashbane for goblin containment. She filed it under secured. She added it to a list she kept in the back of the Black family cipher book, locked with magic that predated every ministry surveillance standard. 2 Horcruxes secured. 5 remaining. One of them living inside the boy she was now feeding mashed apple at the kitchen table, while Draco observed from his basket with the sovereign disapproval of a child who had been perfectly comfortable before this intrusion. She had time. She intended to use every year of it. The girl who reorganized libraries without touching them lived in Bristol, in a house organized in the way of 2 people who had strong opinions about where things belonged and the consistency to implement those opinions across years. The ward flare detector on Bellatrix's study desk had registered the event from Lyon, not simply powerful, not simply uncontrolled, but organized. The distinction mattered. Power without organization was weather. Power with organization was architecture. She went to Bristol on a gray February afternoon because the seer stone had shown her a small hand-tracing wand core theory, and Bellatrix Black did not require a second indication when the first was that specific. The library's children's section was nearly empty. At a table surrounded by books arranged with an exactness that no librarian had produced, a girl sat reading a biography of Marie Curie with the forward-leaning focus of someone who had forgotten to be 6 years old. Enormous, dark eyes, brown hair with strong opinions about direction, lips moving occasionally over words she was working through rather than skipping, because she was not a child who skipped difficult words. Bellatrix stood at the section's entrance and watched her for 20 minutes. 4,000 books, reorganized by subject and author and date, without a single hand touching them. The event had produced a reading unlike anything in her comparative files. A 6-year-old child who had, without conscious direction, rearranged an entire library because a librarian mentioned the collection was in a mess. The intention had been unconscious. The execution had been perfect. The girl looked up. Her eyes were direct in the unsettling way of children who have not yet learned that directness is considered rude. "You've been staring at me for quite a long time," she said. "You've reorganized 4,000 books without touching them," Bellatrix said. A pause that was genuinely thoughtful rather than uncertain. "Yes," the girl said, in the tone of someone confirming a fact they have been aware of for some time, and are relieved to have acknowledged. Bellatrix sat down across from her in a chair sized for 8-year-olds, which she managed with the composure of a woman who did not permit furniture to make her feel undignified. "Would you like to know what that means?" Bellatrix said. "I thought I might be going mad," the girl said, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone who has already generated and tested several hypotheses and found them all insufficient. "The books in my bedroom moved last Tuesday. I didn't touch them either. You are not going mad. You are something considerably more interesting." A pause, precise and intentional. "My name is Bellatrix Black. I have 2 boys approximately your age who are in urgent need of someone to make them think harder." "What is your name?" "Hermione Granger," she said. Something moved in Bellatrix's expression. "Brief, controlled, of course it is," she said, and in her voice was the specific quality of a woman who has just found the last piece of a construction she has been building in her mind for 40 minutes. She had done the genealogical work 2 months prior. Hector Dagworth Granger, founder of the most extraordinary society of potioneers, connected through a squib line to a Muggle family in Bristol, and through that family to the magical resurgence, sitting across from her with a biography open to Chapter 7. The heritage was real and ancient. What it meant for Hermione's standing in the wizarding world was something Bellatrix intended to ensure she could control rather than merely inherit. The Granger's house was organized in the way of 2 people whose trust was not given easily and was therefore worth having. Jean Granger had a notepad and filled 2 pages in compact, precise handwriting. Robert Granger asked 2 questions. Was Hermione safe with her, and what did Bellatrix want from the arrangement? "She is safer with me than anywhere else available to her," Bellatrix said. "I will not permit harm to come to her. I will ensure she develops the capacity to prevent it herself." She met his eyes. "I want, from this arrangement, a 3rd child who can make the other 2 sharper." That is the complete answer. They asked for a week. They came back in 4 days. The Sanguis Adoptio required 3 days of preparation, the chateau's inner sanctum, every ward layer verified twice. Jean and Robert Granger stood to the left, witnesses in the formal sense, holding each other's hands with the slightly stunned composure of people doing something unprecedented and deciding that composure was the correct response. Harry and Draco were pressed against the doorframe, constitutionally incapable of being elsewhere when something significant was occurring. The ritual required 37 minutes when performed correctly. The sacrifice, a lock of Bellatrix's own hair and with it a piece of her magical access, a giving away that was not metaphorical but structural, she made without visible hesitation. When it was done, Hermione stood in the center of the room and looked at her own hands with the expression of someone checking whether an experience has produced a visible change and finding the question genuinely interesting regardless of the answer. "Well," she said. "You are now the Lady Black," Bellatrix said. "Whether you feel like it is beside the point. The magic is complete." Hermione considered this with the thoroughness she applied to new information. "Do I get robes?" "You get robes," Harry confirmed from the doorframe with the gravity of someone imparting genuinely useful intelligence. "And etiquette lessons," Draco added. He had been observing Hermione since her arrival with the careful assessment of a child deciding whether someone was worth knowing. The assessment had been running for 6 hours. He had arrived at a provisional conclusion. "You'll fit in," he said. In Draco's vocabulary, this was not faint praise. Hermione looked at them both. Then at Bellatrix. "When do we start?" she said. The education of 3 future powers was not a gentle thing. 5:30 every morning. The East Courtyard, stone cold, breath steaming. Physical conditioning first, before language or magic or theory, because Bellatrix had been clear on the philosophy from the beginning. A mind requires a body that works, and a body that works requires the humility of learning what it cannot yet do. Harry took to the physical work with the focused pleasure of someone whose body had always been slightly ahead of his vocabulary for describing what it wanted. Draco was initially resistant, and eventually, through the specific alchemy of competitive pride, more committed than either of the others. Hermione was methodical. She identified her deficits in the first week, designed a supplementary program by the second, and was outperforming her baseline by the third, because Hermione's relationship with inadequacy was to remove it as efficiently as possible. Wandless magic fundamentals at 7 o'clock. The first exercise was a single white feather placed on a stone table in the courtyard's center. The instruction was to move it. No incantation, no wand, no described mechanism, simply the movement, achieved through whatever internal process each child could locate and develop. They spent 8 months on that feather. "This is excessive," Draco said at month 3. "The feather is not the point," Bellatrix said. "The feather is the diagnostic. What I am reading in each of you is worth 8 months of your impatience." Harry moved the feather through instinct, feeling first and understanding afterward, his magic arriving before the thought that directed it. Draco moved it through architecture, building the intention in precise layers until it had structural integrity sufficient to produce effect. Hermione moved it through comprehension, needing to understand the mechanism before she could operate it. And once she understood it, she moved it in 17 distinct ways within a single afternoon. By the end of the 8 months, Bellatrix had a complete profile of 3 magical intelligences. She taught to the profiles rather than to a general standard. This meant 3 overlapping curricula, running simultaneously, occasionally intersecting when a lesson required what only the combination of all 3 could provide. Theory at 9 o'clock was not the sanitized version of Hogwarts textbooks, which Bellatrix kept on a shelf for reference the way a scholar kept bad sources, useful for understanding official positions, not useful for understanding what was true. The real shape of the wizarding world, its blood politics, institutional memory, the Wisengamot structure, the statute of secrecy's most commonly exploited clauses, the founding documents of Gringotts. Hermione Cross referenced across 6 categories simultaneously. Harry built interior maps of fact he could navigate later. Draco connected everything new to something he already knew. Bellatrix observed all 3 methods without comment and incorporated them into how she presented new material. Languages at noon. Latin first, then French by immersion, then Ancient Greek when Hermione found an etymology text at 8, read it in 2 days, and arrived in Bellatrix's study with the clear intention of learning it properly. "If you are going to learn it," Bellatrix said, "learn it correctly." She hired a tutor, who arrived on Tuesdays and discovered her assessment of his students as merely advanced was a significant understatement. The wands came at 9. The wand-maker, a slight, precise Frenchman named Archambault, who had trained under Gregorovitch and kept no records of unusual clients, came to the chateau rather than receiving them. Bellatrix remained at the study doorway, the furthest distance from the process she considered acceptable. Harry's was holly, 11 inches, phoenix feather core. When it chose him, Archambault went still for a moment, in the way of a craftsman recognizing something significant. He made a note in his private record and said nothing aloud. Draco's was hawthorn, 10 inches, unicorn hair, precise and elegant. The wand of someone whose magic operated through structural integrity rather than instinct or imagination. It suited him with the immediate rightness of things that have been waiting for their owner. Hermione's vine wood and dragon heartstring, 10 3/4 inches, produced when she first cast with it a resonance that moved through every instrument in Bellatrix's study simultaneously. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quality of a chord finding its completion, as if the room had been slightly out of tune and had now corrected. Bellatrix looked at the instruments for a moment. Then at Hermione. "Is that normal?" Hermione asked. "No," Bellatrix said. Hermione wrote this down. The battle arts lesson at 8 was the one Harry returned to most often in later years, not because of what was taught, but because of the specific moment that revealed what the teaching was for. The east courtyard, afternoon light cutting at a low angle across the stone. Bellatrix standing at the center, the three of them at the triangle's points, practice wands ready, because they had been told to take positions and they had taken them without coordinating, which meant the triangle had happened without discussion. "A Death Eater is coming," Bellatrix said, not loudly, conversationally, as if reporting weather. "He is twice your size. He is experienced. He wants to impress his lord. He will not hesitate to hurt any of you." A pause measured in heartbeats. "What do you do?" Harry raised his wand. "Wrong," Bellatrix said. "Wands down. What do you do first?" "Think," Hermione said from her point of the triangle. "Wrong, also. You have been reading too much theory and not enough situation." She moved to stand before Draco, who had said nothing. "Lord Malfoy, what do you do first?" Draco had been watching. He looked at her. He looked at the triangle they were standing in. "We've already done it," he said. Bellatrix smiled. It was the rarest thing she did and the most precise, deployed only when something had earned it, which meant it had weight when it arrived. "We have already done it. The fight began when you chose your positions. You did not choose them strategically, you chose them instinctively, because you have been trained to read space as a problem with solutions. The triangle was your answer to a question you hadn't consciously asked yet." She looked at each of them in turn. "When does a black begin?" 3 children, 8 years old, understanding something simultaneously. "Before," Harry said. "Before," she confirmed. "Remember that. The spell is the last thing, not the first." When Hermione was 10, she found the Dagworth Granger reference in a genealogical text in the library's 3rd row, made a note, spent 2 weeks building a research structure around it, and arrived in Bellatrix's study on a Tuesday morning with the note and 6 cross-references and a very specific question. Bellatrix told her everything. The Hector Dagworth Granger connection, the Squib branch, the Muggle assimilation, the magical resurgence that was Hermione herself. She did not soften any of it or frame it for palatability. Hermione listened with complete attention. When it was done, she was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was reorganizing a structure rather than processing an emotion. "So I'm not simply Muggle-born," she said. "You are Muggle-born," Bellatrix said, with a precision that was its own form of respect. "Your parents are Muggles. Your magical heritage is more complex. Both facts are simultaneously true. The people who will call you mudblood are not interested in nuance. You are, and so am I. What you are is a witch carrying a Muggle-born designation, an ancient family connection, and a blood adoption into the House of Black. It is a complicated identity. You will learn which parts of it to lead with in different rooms." "What do you lead with?" Hermione asked. "The part they're afraid of," Bellatrix said. "I always lead with that." Hermione considered this. She looked at the research structure she had built, the 6 cross-references, the careful architecture of her inquiry. Then she picked up her quill and added one more note at the bottom. lead with the part they're afraid of. She underlined it twice. It was in Hermione's second year at the chateau that Bellatrix confirmed in measurable form what the seer stone had shown her on the night everything changed. She had been monitoring Harry's magical signature since his first month in France, logging it in the observation notes with the methodical attention she gave to anything significant. What she was looking for was the doubled quality, the dark frequency living alongside his own. She found it when Harry was 6 and beginning to show voluntary control of his accidental magic. The readings were unmistakable. A foreign signature, cold and precisely identifiable, nested inside Harry's own warmth like a presence that had been there so long it had started to believe it was native. She did not tell Harry immediately. There was nothing useful to be gained by telling a 6-year-old that part of the most dangerous dark wizard of the century was living in his scar. She told him when he was 9. She sat him down in the study on a Tuesday morning and said it plainly, the way she said everything that cost her something to say. Harry was quiet for a long time. "Is it hurting me?" he said. "Not in any way that is currently measurable," she said. "Can you remove it without killing me?" he said. She had expected grief, perhaps, or fear. She got neither. She got the specific quality of attention he used when he was determining what something meant and how to respond to it, the most Harry thing about him, and also, she noted, the most black family. "Not by any means I can provide," she said. "The only thing that can destroy it is the magic that created it. The killing curse, cast by the man who made the fragment, directed at you. The particular cruelty of a Horcrux's construction is that only its maker can undo it. Then we need him to cast it at me," Harry said. "Yes, and I need to survive it. He will use your blood in the ritual when he returns," she said. "Your blood carries what your mother left in it, the protection she built. If he uses your blood to rebuild his body, that protection enters him along with it. When he then turns his own magic against you, the paradox holds, he cannot end what he has anchored himself to. You will not die permanently. The fragment will be destroyed. And then we are in position to finish everything else." Harry looked at her. "You've been building toward that moment since the night you took me from Hagrid," he said. "Yes," she said. "The whole plan. Every Horcrux you've been securing. It's been leading there." Yes, he was 9 years old. He looked at her with his mother's eyes, and he said, "Tell me everything I need to know." She did. The ring Horcrux had been retrieved from Little Hangleton, using intelligence Regulus provided. Regulus, who had survived the Inferi Cave and spent more than a decade in quiet exile in the south of France. She had found him through sources that took years to cultivate. He gave her everything he knew about the Horcruxes. She gave him his brother's address. The ring was under Ashbane's goblin containment, the resurrection stone within it sealed. The diadem had required 3 years of patient correspondence with the Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw's ghost, who carried her particular grief through Hogwarts's corridors and was not going to accelerate for anyone. She told Bellatrix where the diadem was hidden. Bellatrix retrieved it from the Room of Requirement during a summer, when Hogwarts was empty, and destroyed the Horcrux within it, using the Stella Maledictio turned inward. 5 down. 1 remaining. The fragment living in the scar above Harry's eye. Everything else was preparation for the moment that piece came undone. The night before Hogwarts, Harry found Bellatrix in the study. She was at her desk with the seer stone, and the fire and no other light, which was how she sat when she was not reading, but thinking, the stone giving enough illumination to see the room without providing enough for work, which meant she had chosen presence over productivity for the evening. He stood in the doorway. He was 11, and had been 11 for 3 months and was, in the specific way of children who have been raised to be capable, already more than that. "Can't sleep," she said without looking up. "Are you worried?" he asked. "I'm assessing," she said. "What's the difference?" She looked at him. The firelight made his eyes very green. Worry is passive. It considers what might go wrong and produces no action. Assessment identifies variables and determines responses. A pause. I am determining responses. To what? To the fact that you will walk into that school and everything they thought they knew about Harry Potter will be incorrect. They have been constructing a version of you since Godric's Hollow out of absence and assumption. The version they have built does not resemble you in any particular. She looked at him steadily. Some of them will try to put you in it regardless. The box is more comfortable for them than the reality. What do I do when they try? Look at them, she said, and remind them who they are speaking to. He stood in the doorway for another moment. Then he said good night, which was not a small thing between two people who did not perform warmth, and went to bed. Bellatrix looked at the stone. Its surface showed the wide current, the broad, complicated river of what they had built together, full of cross-currents and variables she could not fully read. 5 Horcruxes secured, 1 remaining, in the only place it could be reached. She closed the study and went to her own rooms, passing the east wing where 3 children were theoretically sleeping and were, based on the muffled sound of argument about wand theory, doing something adjacent. She did not stop. She had prepared them for everything. The rest was theirs to do. They arrived at King's Cross 20 minutes early. Bellatrix had been clear on this. Arriving on time was functionally indistinguishable from arriving late, because both communicated that the arrival had been calibrated to someone else's schedule rather than one's own. The Sovereign House arrived when it chose to arrive, which was 20 minutes before anything began, because 20 minutes was sufficient time to read a room before the room knew it was being read. The station was doing what large stations did. Moving people with the organized urgency of a system that had decided flow was more important than any individual within it. Bellatrix moved through it in gray traveling robes with silver edging, understated and expensive in the way that signals wealth by refusing to perform it. 3-dimensionally expanded trunks. Harry's owl, Hedwig, regarding the crowds with imperial disinterest. Draco's eagle owl, Scorpius, with opinions about being transported in public. Hermione's cat, Crookshanks, who had assessed both owls and communicated through posture alone that he found them insufficient. On the platform, the Weasley family registered as sound before sight. 6 children producing the particular energy of people who are fundamentally comfortable with each other's company. The youngest boy, Ron Weasley, whom Harry knew from Bellatrix's briefings, looked at Harry with the transparent recognition of someone who has heard a name many times and is now recalibrating it against an unexpected reality. Harry gave him a nod, not dismissive, not warm, simply acknowledging. He filed Ron Weasley under probably genuine, worth knowing, and moved his attention onward. Hermione was already doing the same thing from a different position, which meant they were covering twice the ground without coordinating. Which was the point. Bellatrix gathered them with a gesture that was barely a gesture, a slight shift of attention that they had been reading for years and did not require amplification. "You know what this is," she said, not loudly. The platform noise absorbed everything beyond the immediate circle. You are not entering it as students waiting to be formed. You are entering it as what you already are. Do not permit them to forget that. She looked at each of them in sequence, Harry, Draco, Hermione, confirming readiness rather than expressing concern. She shook Harry's hand. Their standard form, not because warmth was absent, but because dignity was a more honest expression than performance. He met her eyes and she held them for one beat past the functional, which was its own language between two people who had shared a table and a decade of Tuesday afternoons. She embraced Hermione, who did not manage not crying but contained it to 4 seconds, which Bellatrix accepted without comment. She looked at Draco for a moment. He was 11, trying very hard to be the Lord Malfoy she had been calling him since he was 7, and succeeding well enough that the trying was almost invisible. "Well," she said, to all three of them. "Well," Harry said. The train's whistle sounded its warning note. They went. Bellatrix did not go with them. She went to Hogwarts by a different route, at a different time, which arrived at the same destination. The Great Hall, when the doors opened for the first years, had the specific quality of a room that has been producing the same moment for 900 years and has become, through repetition, very good at it. The candles, the ceiling reflecting the clouded September sky, the 4 tables running the hall's length with the settled authority of furniture that expects to remain. The first years filed in with the organized uncertainty of people navigating a space that is larger than they had prepared themselves for. Harry, Draco, and Hermione had prepared themselves for it exactly, because Bellatrix's briefings on Hogwarts' architectural dimensions had been precise. They positioned themselves at the front, not aggressively, not conspicuously, simply with the efficiency of people who understood that position was information and the front provided more of it than the middle. Then, from the rear of the hall, the great doors opened again. Bellatrix walked in. She had not been announced. There had been no request. She was simply there, suddenly in the candlelight, and the great hall discovered in the space of approximately 2 seconds that it contained someone it had not accounted for and did not know how to categorize. The gray robes caught the candlelight in the specific way of quality material. Her posture was the posture of someone who has decided, a long time ago, what she is in relation to any room she enters. The hall went quiet, not the quiet that precedes ceremony, the quiet that follows the arrival of something unexpected and significant, when collective attention reorganizes itself before collective language can catch up. At the staff table, Minerva McGonagall went absolutely still. Phileas Flitwick set down his goblet. Severus Snape, who had been watching the first years with his characteristic assessment, moved his gaze to the back of the hall and remained there. Albus Dumbledore rose from his chair. He came around the staff table and descended the steps to the hall's floor with the careful deliberateness of a man processing several things simultaneously and ensuring that his body communicated only what he intended it to communicate. He stopped in front of Bellatrix. They regarded each other across approximately 4 feet of Hogwarts flagstone, and the quality of the silence between them was the quality of 2 people communicating a very large amount of information very efficiently through the structure of having known each other for 40 years. "Bellatrix," Dumbledore said. His voice was exactly what it always was, warm, measured, calibrated, I had heard rumors, she said. The wizarding world has always been afflicted with them. She looked past him, briefly, at the 3 children near the front of the first-year group, Harry with his specific stillness, Draco with his precise composure, Hermione with her notepad already produced, making observations about the hall's ward architecture. "I am delivering my wards to their educational institution, as is legally required of any guardian in good standing." She returned her attention to Dumbledore. "Did you have a specific concern, Headmaster?" Dumbledore looked at the children. He looked at Bellatrix. What moved through his expression was not anger and not surprise, but something more complicated. The specific quality of a brilliant man discovering that a plan he has been running for a decade has been running inside a larger plan he did not design. "We should speak privately," he said. "I'm certain we should," she agreed pleasantly. "After the sorting." She walked past him to the staff table, took the empty chair at its end, the chair that was there because the table was set for 11, and the current staff numbered 10, and sat in it with the composure of a woman who had been invited. No one stopped her. McGonagall looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Bellatrix. Bellatrix looked at the first years being organized for the sorting, specifically at Harry, who glanced at her once, briefly, and then glanced away. Gilderoy Lockhart, in periwinkle blue, his teeth performing at full capacity, had prepared a statement about himself that ran to approximately 4 minutes of well-modulated enthusiasm. He had been looking forward to delivering it since August. He got 4 words out. "Thank you, headmaster, I sit down," Bellatrix said. The hall went completely quiet. Lockhart looked at her with the expression of a man who has never been interrupted and is trying to determine whether this constitutes a category error or a personal affront. "I beg you were preparing to deliver a statement about your professional accomplishments. I know Dirk Cresswell. He was present in Wagga Wagga during the werewolf incident you have described across 4 book jackets." She folded her hands on the table. "He wrote to me about it. He said the werewolf had been driven off by a local handler 3 hours before you arrived. He said you were very thorough in taking credit for the paperwork." Lockhart's smile was losing structural integrity in real time. "Gregory Yaxley was in Bandon during the Banshee incident. My associate Cassiopeia Vane was in Transylvania during your vampire campaign. She wrote a letter as well. She was quite funny about it." Bellatrix looked at him with the specific quality of attention she reserved for things she was about to remove from a situation. "If you are not, in fact, capable of performing the magic you have claimed in print, I would strongly recommend declining this position before a student is harmed by the deficit." A pause of exactly the right duration. "Sit down." Lockhart sat down. From the Slytherin table, after the sorting, Draco said something very quietly to Harry that made Harry produce the expression he wore when something was genuinely funny and he was declining to show it. Hermione was writing in her notepad. Dumbledore looked at Bellatrix with the expression of a man who has watched a precise surgical operation performed in his dining room and is recalibrating his assessment of the surgeon. He said nothing. There was, at this particular moment, nothing adequate to say. The Sorting Hat's work that night produced its specific moments of uncertainty, but none longer than the 90 seconds it spent on Harry Potter's head while the hall watched in the particular silence of people who have realized they are witnessing something they did not have a category for. Inside the Hat, the conversation was different from any the Hat had conducted in 40 years. "Your defenses," the Hat said. "I have not encountered this architecture before. It is organized." "Yes," Harry said. "Who taught you, my guardian?" "You are not trying to hide from me." "No, I'm deciding what to show you." A pause. "You have the courage for Gryffindor, the precision for Ravenclaw, the ambition for Slytherin, the patience, which surprises me, for Hufflepuff. You are not a child who sorts cleanly." "I know," Harry said. "What do you want from this school?" "To understand everything that has been built without my knowledge, and to determine what to do about it." "That," the Hat said, "is the most Slytherin answer I have received in 40 years. And you said it without a trace of aggression, which is rarer still." "Slytherin," the Hat announced. Hermione required 2 minutes. The hall watched with the complete attention of an audience that has understood something unusual is happening. Then, in a tone of someone who has arrived at a conclusion that surprised even itself, "Slytherin." Draco was barely on the stool before the Hat said Slytherin, with the decisive certainty of a consciousness that has found an easy one after 2 difficult ones. At the staff table, Bellatrix did not applaud. She was watching Dumbledore's face. Dumbledore's face, for once, was worth watching. 2 weeks later, Remus Lupin arrived for an interview that Dumbledore had arranged through channels prepared since the previous year. When a letter from Bellatrix, sent in August, flagging Lockhart's documented fabrications with 3 verified witness accounts attached, had arrived at his office and made him sit very still for approximately an hour. The announcement of Lupin's appointment was made at a Monday breakfast. Harry found Hermione in the corridor afterward. "She planned this," Harry said. Lupin, passing behind them on his way to the defense classroom for his first walkthrough, slowed. "Has she?" he said. "Not quite a question." "The Wagga Wagga chapter in the Lockhart book," Harry said. "She left it on the reading pile in June. I thought she was being comprehensive about defense literature." He paused. "The chapter has annotations in her handwriting. She had already contacted Dirk Cresswell by March." Lupin was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed. It was genuine and warm and slightly surprised, the laugh of someone who has encountered something that exceeded their expectations in a direction they find, on reflection, entirely appropriate. She annotated the chapter in March, Lupin said. She was probably planning it before that, Hermione said, arriving from the direction of the library with her notepad. March is the earliest documented point. I found the Cresswell correspondence in the file last week. She keeps everything filed. Lupin looked at Harry. Harry looked at Lupin. Your father, Lupin said, would have found this either very funny or very alarming. Probably both, Harry said. Yes, Lupin agreed. That sounds right. He continued toward the defense classroom, and Harry watched him go with the specific feeling of something slotting into place. Not a dramatic recognition, not an overwhelming emotion. Simply the quiet satisfaction of a variable that has been theoretical becoming concrete. The man his father had loved was here. He was real. He was exactly what the stories had suggested, and also somehow more specific than any story. He would tell Bellatrix that the Lupin appointment had gone well. She would say she knew. He would say he knew she knew. It was the kind of conversation they had been having for years, conducted in a vocabulary of mutual understanding that did not require elaboration, which was perhaps the most Black family thing about both of them. The Slytherin common room's existing hierarchy rested on the familiar scaffolding of inherited fear and pure-blood prestige, which was a structure that had been load-bearing for decades and had never been seriously tested. The testing began on the first night. Not confrontationally. Confrontation was a tool of people who needed to demonstrate force because they lacked the architecture to make force unnecessary. What happened on the first night was quieter and more durable. Hermione Granger Black sat down at the study table in the common room, produced her notepad, and began organizing the first-year class schedules with the focused authority of someone who had been preparing for exactly this kind of problem since she was 8 years old. Within 20 minutes, 3 other first years had drifted toward the table. Not because they had been invited, they hadn't, but because competence has a specific gravity, and Hermione's competence was the kind that made proximity feel like an advantage. Harry spent the first week reading the room completely before doing anything visible in it. He mapped the social architecture, who held authority through fear, who through genuine competence, who was performing confidence, and who possessed it. He noted which students were waiting for someone to demonstrate that the existing order was not fixed. Draco spent the first week watching Marcus Flint with the specific facility for observation that appeared to be social engagement. He attended Quidditch trials because Quidditch trials revealed power distribution in concentrated form. By the end of the week, he had produced a complete social map which he gave to Harry, and Hermione folded into a Transfiguration textbook. Hermione added 6 observations. Harry added 2 more. The map was more complete for the revision, which was the point. On a Thursday in the second week, Hermione approached Flint with the pleasant directness of someone delivering information rather than making a social move. She noted that his transfiguration work was sufficient to pass, but insufficient for the professional marks he had expressed ambition toward in front of 6 witnesses. He could not refuse without admitting weakness publicly, or being rude to a first year who had done nothing aggressive. He accepted. By November, he was attending her study sessions 3 times a week and was, in the instinctive way of someone with functional self-preservation, not inclined to examine the mechanism. When older students made the mistake of backing a first year into a corridor with the specific intent that Slytherin corridors occasionally produced, Harry would appear at the corridor's end. Not running, not approaching. Simply present, in the posture of someone whose relationship with confrontation was different from what the older students were used to. Standing with the quality of stillness that years of 5:30 mornings in the Lion Courtyard had produced. The older students found, consistently, that they had somewhere else to be. Word traveled through the house in stages. First, don't touch the first years. Then, the first years are with Black's wards. Then a specific kind of silence that fell over conversations when any of the 3 of them entered a room. the silence of people recalculating what they thought they knew about the situation they were in. Draco found this deeply satisfying. He would not have said so. He didn't need to. Harry could tell from the specific quality of Draco's composure during these moments, which was smoother than usual, which meant he was pleased. Lucius Malfoy sent word requesting a private meeting with Draco. Draco attended in his best robes and the particular expression Bellatrix had spent 3 years drilling into him, the expression of someone who has decided, in advance of the meeting, what the meeting is for and what it is not for. Lucius opened with warmth, which was his preferred tool. "Draco," Lucius said. "You look well. I am well. Thank you, Father, your guardian." Bellatrix, a calculated pause. "I want you to understand that if at any point you wish to discuss returning to, I am content in my current arrangement," Draco said. He looked at his father with the steady attention of someone who is not uncomfortable and is not performing comfort. "I spoke with Mother last week. She mentioned you've hired a new house elf." Lucius blinked. The shift was intentional. Derailing emotional manipulation through sudden specificity was a Black family technique, and Draco had taken to it most naturally. "Yes," Lucius said, recalibrating. She seemed pleased about it. Draco stood and produced a precisely formal nod, respect for the role, no warmth for the person occupying it, and left. Outside the door, he stood for 28 seconds. Then he walked to find Harry and Hermione, because that was what you did when something required processing. You went to the people who understood the relevant variables. 3 weeks later, Lucius arrived at the Slytherin common room entrance on a Saturday afternoon. Hermione was already in the corridor. She had noted the direction and quality of his approach 7 minutes ago and had positioned herself accordingly. "Lord Malfoy," she said. "The house wards were recalibrated 3 days ago. The access phrase has been updated." Lucius looked at the door. He looked at Hermione. He looked at the door again. "Draco would be happy to provide the new phrase," Hermione continued. "He's in the library. The reply time for a message might take a while. Alternatively, I have a form for scheduled family visits. 3-week processing time, but it guarantees access." She produced the form. She held it out. She smiled. Lucius Malfoy looked at his son's first-year ward, holding an administrative form in a Hogwarts corridor, and understood. In the comprehensive way of intelligent people encountering a complete strategic defeat, that he was not getting into that common room today. He left without taking the form. Hermione noted the interaction in her pad. "Update Bellatrix. She'll want to know about the recalibration pretext." She went back to her reading. The corridor was quiet. The wards held. The case filing arrived at the Wizengamot docket on a Tuesday and landed in the administrative record the way a stone lands in still water, not dramatically, but with consequences that moved outward from the point of impact in every direction simultaneously. The case, in the matter of Sirius Orion Black, application for writ of wrongful detention and demand for trial under Wizengamot Charter Article 17. The filing solicitor, Grimgold Ashbane. Gringotts affiliated legal practice, 17 years of Wizengamot case history, 0 losses and challenges to ministry procedural compliance. Bellatrix had been building the case since the previous September. The architecture of Sirius's wrongful imprisonment was not complex once you looked for it, which was the specific kind of simplicity that only existed when no one had looked. A decade in Azkaban on Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s authority. No trial. No formal charges heard before the Wizengamot. No evidence presented. No sentence imposed by a judicial body. A man imprisoned by administrative fiat and left there because the war had ended, and the political will to examine what the war had produced did not exist. The trial filled the Wizengamot chamber to capacity in the way it filled when something significant was being decided, not the managed attendance of routine sessions, but the complete attendance of members who understood that absence from this specific proceeding would itself constitute a position. Dumbledore was present as Chief Warlock. his position being that justice required acknowledging what had not been done, the correct position, and also the one that cost him something to occupy publicly. He sat, and he was quiet, and his expression was the expression of a man paying a debt he had not known he owed until someone presented the accounting. Ashbane rose. "I have 4 questions," he said. "I will require answers to all 4 before we proceed." He looked at the assembled Wizengamot with the patience of a being whose civilization had been keeping records since before the founding of Hogwarts. "First, where is the record of Sirius Black's trial?" Silence. "Second, where is the evidence presented at that trial to the Wizengamot?" Continued silence, of a different quality. The silence of people who know the answer and are finding it inadequate. "Third, which Wizengamot member reviewed and approved the evidence before sentence was determined?" The minister's chair creaked. "Fourth, under which specific clause of the Wizengamot Charter does indefinite imprisonment without trial constitute lawful custody in Wizarding Britain?" Ashbane sat down. The ministry solicitor delivered, over 40 minutes, a response that amounted to a description of circumstances rather than answers. The atmosphere, Crouch Sr.'s authority, the urgency, the evidence as it had appeared at the time. Ashbane rose for cross-examination and spent 11 minutes establishing, through documentation rather than argument, that explaining circumstances was not the same as citing a legal clause, that no such clause existed in the Wizengamot Charter, and that the absence was not an ambiguity but a structural fact. He sat down. The vote was called. 41 members voted for acquittal, 6 abstained, 3 voted against, and one of them subsequently filed a correction indicating she had pressed the wrong button, which reduced the against vote to 2. Sirius Black was acquitted. He came out of Azkaban on a gray morning, blinking in weak spring light, with the specific physical quality of someone who has been remade by a decade of systematic deprivation and has come out the other side still themselves. He was thin, gray at the temples. His eyes, when they adjusted to the light, had the brightness of someone whose intelligence had been the thing the Dementors could not reach. He stood in the prison's entrance and looked at Bellatrix. Behind her, Ashbane to her left, 3 children in their best robes arranged in the specific way they arranged themselves when they were being formal. Sirius looked at Bellatrix for a long time. "You could have had me out years ago," he said. "No," she said. The process had to be built correctly or they would find a mechanism to reverse it. A legal victory with structural weaknesses is not a victory. A pause, measured and genuine. And I wasn't ready. "For what?" She stepped aside. Sirius saw Harry, 11 years old, Lily's eyes and James's hair, standing with the composed stillness of a child who is using all of his training to remain in one place rather than doing something that the training had not fully prepared for. "Hi," Harry said. Something in Sirius's face broke open in the best possible way, not collapsing, but opening, the way a window opens to let in air that has been absent from a room for a very long time. Regulus was waiting at Grimmauld Place. Bellatrix had not told Sirius. Some information could not be delivered at a distance, and in stages, it required a specific room and the structural support of people present who understood what it meant. When Sirius walked through the door of number 12 and found his brother standing in the drawing room, the sound he made was not a word. Regulus was quieter than he had been at 18. The specific quality of someone who has spent years and years in hiding and has used the time to understand the choices that produced the hiding. He was alive and real, standing in the house where they had both grown up, and neither of them said anything useful for approximately 4 minutes. Narcissa arrived with Andromeda, who had come because Bellatrix's message had been brief and specific. "Come today." Andromeda walked into the drawing room and looked at Regulus, whom she had not seen since before everything fell apart, and sat down very suddenly in the nearest chair and held Narcissa's hand and breathed carefully. The Black family was in one room. The remainder, fractured and scarred and scattered across 20 years of choices that could not be undone, but alive. Bellatrix stood at the room's edge and looked at it. Harry appeared beside her. She did not look at him. She was still looking at the room. But she said very quietly, "This is what it was for." Harry was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. Harry found the Chamber of Secrets in his second year, which was not something anyone had asked him to do. He had known it existed since he was 9, when Bellatrix had covered Hogwarts' structural history in a 3-week unit that included everything she considered relevant about the school her wards were entering. Its location was documented, obliquely, in the Black family's collection of pre-ministry wizarding architecture records, a notation made by a Black family member who had attended Hogwarts in the 17th century and written in the margins of what appeared to be a charms textbook. The Serpent Founder's second house is below the second floor, south wall, through water. Harry went alone on a Sunday evening, having told Hermione he was going and having endured her response, which was comprehensive. He found the entrance in the second-floor girls' bathroom with the ease of someone who had been given a directional description and a floor plan, and had spent 4 months triangulating both against his own spatial mapping of the castle. A sink with a small snake worn almost illegible by time. He spoke to it. 2 syllables, barely above breath, and the floor opened. He went down. Draco, behind him, whose presence Harry had known about since the 4th-floor staircase, came after. Hermione, who had positioned herself at the bathroom entrance with her eyes closed and her notepad open, followed the sound of their footsteps and the architecture of the ambient magic, because she had a functioning mind she intended to preserve, and direct basilisk gaze was not a variable she was prepared to introduce into her morning. The chamber was vast and dark and smelled of cold stone and centuries, and the basilisk was everything the Black family's bestiary records had described, and also considerably more real than any description. Enormous, the length of the chamber's far third, scales the color of old iron, utterly still in the specific stillness of something that has been awake for 900 years and has learned that movement is a form of information and information should be controlled. Her eyes were closed. Harry noted this. It was a deliberate courtesy. He had spoken first, at the foot of the entrance pipe, before they entered. 2 sentences in parcel tongue. "We come without weapons. We come to speak." The chamber had been quiet for 11 seconds. Then, from somewhere deep below the stone, the vibration of acknowledgement. "What do you want?" Harry asked, in parcel tongue, because that was the correct register for this conversation. The basilisk was still for a long time. "Long since anyone asked," she said. The dialect was archaic. Harry caught roughly 70%, reconstructed the rest from context and from months spent working through the parcel tongue sections of the Black family's linguistic archive. Long since anyone came without a sword. "I know. I'm not here for what they came for." Then, what? He had thought about how to answer this question since September when he had made the decision to find the chamber, and determined that finding it without a purpose was preparation without application. "You have been in this school for 900 years, he said. "You have been directed, controlled, treated as a weapon. The thing that has been directing you recently is an artifact. We are going to remove it." A pause. "After that, you have a choice about what you are. I came to ask what you want that to be." The chamber was very still. The last one who spoke the old language to me wanted a door opened. Before him, another wanted death. A pause that had the quality of something measuring duration. None of them asked. "I know," Harry said. "You are young." "Yes, why would a young one ask what no old one has asked?" Harry considered this. The honest answer was the correct one. "Because I was taught that naming something is a form of respect, and asking is a form of naming. And something that has been here for 900 years deserves the respect of being asked." the great head moved. Not toward him, sideways, the careful repositioning of something that is choosing to be less threatening as a form of communication. One eye opened, angled away, the lethal gaze directed at the chamber wall with the deliberate precision of a creature demonstrating that the weapon is a choice. The eye was ancient gold. "Rest," the basilisk said, "and purpose that is not murder." "I can offer both," Harry said. "Protection in exchange for knowledge. You have been here 900 years. You know things that no one else knows. I will be your memory in the world above, if you will be my guard in the world below." A long silence. "What would you call me?" Harry had not expected this question, which meant it was the important one. He thought carefully. "Merwin," he said. "Old Welsh. It means great one." Marwyn coiled, slowly, massively, the movement taking 30 seconds, because she was simply that large, and it had the quality of something settling into a decision. Harry put his hand on her scales. They were warm. Has she agreed?" Hermione asked, from the chamber entrance, eyes still carefully averted. "Yes," Harry said. A pause. "I have 12 questions." "I know," Harry said. "Come here slowly." Eyes on the floor. Tom Riddle's diary arrived in Ginny Weasley's cauldron via flourish and blots, planted by Lucius Malfoy in the confrontation with Arthur Weasley. Too public, too aggressive to be anything other than a performance concealing a transaction. Harry flagged it to Hermione on the train back to Hogwarts. Hermione began watching Ginny. 3 weeks into term, she had documentation, sentence construction changes in Ginny's written work, knowledge gaps that filled without apparent study, the specific behavioral signature the Black family's dark artifacts section described under possession artifacts, early stage indicators. She brought it to Harry and Draco in the common room with 6 pages of notes and the expression she wore when she had reached a conclusion she found both correct and unpleasant. "She has something," Hermione said. "Something is using her." They sent a message to Bellatrix through the communication system she had established before term, a mirror-linked system operating through Black family channels that predated Ministry monitoring protocols. The response arrived in 4 hours, in black ink on Black family parchment. "I know what it is. I know whose it is. Retrieve it. Do not open it. Send it to me immediately. Bring the girl to me first. If you can manage it safely, she needs to know this was not her fault." Harry found Ginny on a Thursday afternoon with the specific gentleness he deployed when the situation required gentleness, which was a tool he had been given by someone who understood that precision applied to kindness produced results that force could not. He explained what he thought was happening. He explained what it was not her failure, not her weakness, not anything she had done. He watched her face move through several stages and arrive at the expression of someone who has been frightened for weeks and has just been given permission to stop. She handed over the diary with shaking hands. It was black leather, blank on the outside, and warm in the way of things that should not be warm. A deep, specific warmth that was not temperature, but presence. The Riddle fingerprint that Bellatrix had described in her letter, with the careful precision of someone who recognized a signature they had spent decades in proximity to. Harry carried it in a cloth wrapping to the message alcove and sent it to France. Bellatrix destroyed the soul fragment in the Lyon Chateau's inner sanctum, with Sirius present and Regulus at the door, because Regulus had specific reasons for wanting to witness anything related to what lived inside a Horcrux. She used the Stella Maledictio turned inward, the curse's starfire directed into the artifact's core, burning the fragment from the inside. Tom Riddle's presence in the diary screamed as it dissolved. Harry, in the Slytherin common room at that precise moment, heard it through the connection between his scar and the last remaining fragment. The sensation in his scar had changed, the original fragment responding to the destruction of its twin, like a tuning fork answering a frequency. A reminder that the plan still had to run to completion. He went to find Draco and Hermione, because the diary was gone but Lucius Malfoy had put it there, and that was a separate problem with a separate solution. Lucius's formal audit request arrived at his residence 6 weeks later, delivered by Grimgold Ashbane through ministry channels that made refusal impossible. The audit was of all items removed from the Black family's libraries and private collections during Death Eater activities, the legal basis being the Black matriarch's right to recover family property taken without authorization during a period of documented criminal enterprise. The documentation had been compiled over several months by Hermione, who had spent the previous summer cross-referencing Black family inventory records against known Death Eater activity. The diary appeared on the audit list as item 247, one personal diary, black leather binding, manufactured prior to mid-century, of unknown contents, removed from Black family private library at Grimold Place, property of the House of Black. Lucius could not return it. The item no longer existed in recoverable form, which meant he owed the House of Black its assessed value, plus several decades of interest calculated at the goblin banking rate. He paid. Grimgold Ashbane received the payment with the satisfaction of a being who has always found that the most complete victories were the ones where the other party settled the account themselves. The ministry internal memo appeared on a Tuesday in November, authored by the office of the Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. Signed by Dolores Jane Umbridge in the handwriting of someone who has been practicing their signature for a long time and considers its legibility a professional achievement. Hermione read it between breakfast and their first lesson, having obtained a copy through the student access provision of the Wizengamot's Public Records Office, which she had been using systematically for months to track ministry legislative activity. She read it twice, made 6 margin notes in 2 colors, and found Harry and Draco in the corridor outside Transfiguration. She wants to remove practical instruction from Defense Against the Dark Arts, Hermione said. I know, I read it last night, Harry said. She's framing it as standardization. It's not standardization, Draco said, without looking up from the memo Hermione had produced from her bag and was holding in front of him. Standardization produces equivalent outcomes across institutions. This produces equivalent deficits. He handed it back. She wants students who can't fight back. Yes, Hermione said. So they'll need her. The 3 of them were quiet for a moment, in the way they were quiet when they had all arrived at the same conclusion through different routes and were confirming the convergence. We go through the charter, Harry said. I've already started the research, Hermione said. The Hogwarts founding charter had not been opened since an inspector's failed attempt at the astronomy curriculum more than a century prior. The argument Hermione produced from its language was 43 pages. Harry read it twice and made 11 comments. Draco read it once and made 4 comments. All of them about Wizengamot procedural vulnerabilities she had not considered. She incorporated all 15. The argument's core, Hogwarts was established as a sovereign educational institution by 4 founders operating before any Ministry of Magic existed. The charter stated explicitly that it was under the governance of its founders' descendants and the community of scholars within its walls, and that no external governance may impose conditions on the sovereign educational space without the consent of all 4 founding bloodlines. The ministry had no constitutional authority to impose curriculum requirements on a body that predated its own existence. She sent the 43 pages to Grimgold Ashbane. He read them over 2 days and sent back a single line. The argument is sound. The foundation seats will require documentation. Send me what you have. The foundation seats were the argument's most audacious element. Harry's connection to the Slytherin tradition was established through the Chamber Compact and the Parseltongue inheritance, practice-based rather than blood, which the Charter treated as equivalent. The Founders' tradition passes to those who carry it forward in practice and deed, where blood has failed to carry it. Harry had spoken Parseltongue to a 900-year-old serpent in the chamber Salazar Slytherin had built. The compact was documented. His allied seat came through the Peverell-Gryffindor alliance recorded in the Peverell estate documents, held at Gringotts for generations. Hermione's connection to the Hufflepuff scholarly tradition came through Hector Dagworth Granger's initiation record in the Society of Potioneers' founding charter, which documented his initiation into the Hufflepuff scholarly tradition of diligent inquiry. Draco's connection to the Ravenclaw endowment was established through the Malfoy family's documented history as significant donors to the Ravenclaw Library Fund since the 15th century, records the Malfoy archive at Gringotts maintained comprehensively, and which Draco had requested access to in August, finding among them a formal acknowledgement letter from the Ravenclaw Endowment trustees. The Hogwarts Sovereign Neutral Zone Declaration was filed in January. The Ministry's legal department received it and spent the following week in a state of concentrated professional difficulty. The challenge was not finding a counter-argument. There were several, but finding one that did not, in the process of making itself, concede something more significant than the ground it was attempting to defend. The Hogwarts Oversight Act died in committee. The Wizengamot voted on the Sovereign Neutral Zone Declaration the following month. 39 in favor, 14 against, 7 abstentions. The declaration was registered as legally binding precedent. Hogwarts was a sovereign neutral zone. The ministry's proposed oversight was refused at the constitutional level. The school's curriculum remained under the authority of its headmaster and the community of scholars within its walls. Dolores Umbridge arrived at the Hogwarts gates several weeks after the vote, having filed a visit request before the vote's outcome reached her office. Hermione was at the gates. This was not a coincidence. "Madam Umbridge," Hermione said. The Hogwarts Sovereign Neutral Zone Declaration was registered as binding precedent. Under Clause 7, ministry officials may not enter the neutral zone for regulatory purposes without prior consent of the founding council, which requires a request through goblin notarized channels with a 6 to 8 week processing window. Umbridge's smile was performing warmth with the specific quality of something that has been constructed for an audience not responding correctly. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," she said, in the voice she used when she meant the opposite. "As Senior Undersecretary, your title is documented in the filing. The declaration applies to all ministry officials regardless of seniority." Hermione looked up from the document. "I do have the formal request form. Processing time is 6 to 8 weeks. Shall I?" "I don't think that will be necessary," Umbridge said. "Of course," Hermione said. She smiled with the pleasant neutrality of someone who has just confirmed a hypothesis. Umbridge left. The junior ministry officials cast a collective glance backward at the 13-year-old, holding a 43-page legal declaration in a folder significantly more organized than anything in their own office. Hermione noted the interaction in her pad. She went back to her reading. The gates held. The school continued. Hermione had known about the joint submission provision since early summer. She told Harry this on the evening of Dumbledore's announcement about the Triwizard Tournament, in the specific tone of someone delivering information they have been holding at the appropriate temperature until the correct moment for its use. They were in the Slytherin common room, after the feast, the fire burning low, Draco reading in the chair to Harry's left. "The provision is in the original tournament founding charter," Hermione said. She produced a copy, annotated in 3 colors, and turned to page 14. "In the original French and Latin, with my translation in the margin." Harry read it. 17 lines, dense with the specific legal vocabulary of a document written by people who understood that clarity in legal language was a form of power. The core, in cases where a school's champion is identified jointly, where 2 individuals of demonstrably unified magical purpose present themselves as a single submission. The goblet shall receive such submission as a school's entry, and shall select accordingly, provided the submission explicitly cites this provision and the goblet's own historical mandate to identify excellence in its most complete form. The goblet predates the age restriction, Harry said. By approximately 230 years, Hermione confirmed. The age restriction applies, in its own text, to students submitting individually. A joint sovereignty submission under the founding charter provision is categorically different. The goblet will recognize the distinction because the goblet's mandate is older than the restriction and takes precedence over it. Draco, without looking up from his text, Ashbane has already reviewed the filing structure. He reviewed it in September and confirmed it. The submission form is drafted. She produced it. It needs 1 revision and 2 signatures. They submitted on the Friday evening before the goblet closed, at 20 minutes before the flame was due to be extinguished for the selection period. The submission came through Grimgold Ashbane acting as the house's legal agent, which meant it carried the Black family seal in silver wax on each of its 3 pages, and was accompanied by a 7-page legal memorandum citing the provision, the founding charter precedent, and 4 historical records of joint submissions from the tournament's medieval period. Ashbane presented it to the goblet's governing official, a ministry representative who received the 7-page memorandum with the expression of someone who has been given significantly more paperwork than they were prepared for at nearly midnight on a Friday. The goblet accepted the submission. The flame burned for 6 seconds, longer than any other entry. The extension visible to the governing official, who made a note and did not know what the note meant but understood that it meant something. Ashbane sent a message to the chateau, submitted and accepted. Goblet recognized the provision. 6-second burn. Bellatrix's reply arrived in 4 minutes. Good. Halloween, the Great Hall. The goblet of fire on its podium, the assembled school in the specific state of collective anticipation that builds over days and peaks at the moment of resolution. Dumbledore reached into the goblet for the first name. Victor Krum. Durmstrang's controlled approval. Fleur Delacour. Beauxbatons with the composed pride of a delegation that had come expecting exactly this. Cedric Diggory. Hogwarts with the warm surprise of a school that had hoped and is now permitted to celebrate. Dumbledore paused. The goblet produced a 4th slip. He caught it. He read it. He read it a second time, which was not something Albus Dumbledore did with text he had already processed. Reading twice was the specific response of a man encountering something that his model had not fully accounted for. The original Triwizard Tournament Charter provides, under its foundational mandate, for joint submission in cases of unified magical purpose, Dumbledore said. The House of Black has filed such a submission on behalf of 2 Hogwarts students. The goblet has accepted and selected. He set the slip on the podium. Harry Potter and Hermione Granger Black will compete as co-champions representing Hogwarts. The Great Hall's response was a sound that had no standard name because the situation producing it had no standard precedent. Several hundred people processing something simultaneously that none of them had in their existing category system. Karkaroff rose from the Durmstrang delegation. This is irregular. The provision is on page 14 of the founding charter, Hermione said from the Slytherin table, in the carrying tone of someone providing information rather than making an argument. I have copies available. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked at Dumbledore. What passed between them was brief and contained and communicated. With the economy of 2 people who had been reading each other for 3 years, a complete exchange, Dumbledore's acknowledgement that this had been planned with significant lead time, and Harry's acknowledgement that the acknowledgement had been registered. How? Very thorough, Dumbledore said. Hermione wrote the charter citation herself, Harry said. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. Then, in the carefully level tone of a man who has learned to receive the unexpected with professional composure, of course she did. The first task. A dragon enclosure constructed on the castle grounds, 5 champions drawing miniature models to determine their opponents. The ministry had sourced a 5th dragon for the expanded field, a Hebridean black, with a temperament the handlers described as challenging and which Hermione, after 2 weeks of perimeter observation, described as agitated territorial rather than genuinely aggressive, which was a meaningfully different threat profile and required a different response. Harry drew the Welsh green. He stood at the enclosure entrance for 23 seconds before entering, which the audience interpreted as hesitation, and which was, in fact, the completion of the assessment he had been building since the dragon handlers arrived weeks earlier, observing the Welsh Green's behavioral patterns from a distance that was outside the dragon's established threat awareness radius. The behavioral observation notes he had sent to Bellatrix had come back cross-referenced against a black family document on dragon handling practices from the 17th century, produced by a black family member who had found dragons professionally interesting and had spent a decade recording what the official literature ignored. He entered the enclosure. The Welsh Green raised its head with the immediate territorial response of a creature interrupted, in a state of rest and making a size-based calculation. Harry stopped walking. He stood at a specific distance, not close enough to trigger the attack response, not far enough to communicate retreat, and began to hum, a low continuous tone below the register that triggered the Welsh Green's alarm response. The Welsh Green's raised crest lowered. Incrementally, 90 seconds. The dragon did not become docile. It became less immediately hostile, which was sufficient. Harry walked to the nest, retrieved the golden egg, walked back out of the enclosure in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The crowd was entirely silent until he had cleared the gate. Then it became the opposite. In the judges' section, Dumbledore had not moved during the 4 minutes and 11 seconds. He sat with his hands folded on the table and his attention completely fixed on the enclosure. He did not reach for his scoring card until Harry had cleared the gate. Because the scoring card required a free hand and he had not been prepared to commit a free hand to anything else during that interval. "What did he do?" Madame Maxime said. "He listened to his teacher," Dumbledore said. "He gave Harry 10. Hermione faced the Chinese fireball with a glass vial in her left hand and her wand in her right. The vial contained a preparation from Bellatrix's description of a black family compound, aerosolized by a diffusion charm, producing temporary sensory interference for creatures whose threat detection was olfactory primary. Chinese fireballs hunted by smell before sight at middle ranges. The fireball reared. Hermione cast the diffusion charm. The preparation expanded in a controlled sphere. The fireball's rearing became a different kind of motion, confused rather than aggressive, the movement of a creature whose primary sense has temporarily stopped providing coherent information. Hermione walked to the nest, retrieved the egg, walked back out. The crowd produced a sound that was equal parts impressed and deeply uncertain, which Draco, watching from the stands, found the most satisfying possible response. The third task, the maze. They navigated it as a unit, operating with the complementary efficiency of people who have spent years developing a shared tactical language and are now deploying it in conditions that justified its development. Harry read the ambient magic, identifying modified sections, locating obstacle architecture before they encountered it. Hermione solved the structural problems, 3 logic puzzles in the maze's second quadrant, 2 ward sequences in the third, 1 creature encounter she had reviewed the previous evening from the updated adversarial survey. They reached the center in 41 minutes. The cup sat on a stone plinth. Harry looked at it. Hermione looked at it. They had been briefed by Bellatrix about what a portkey inside a competitive magical event felt like and what the risk profile was. "The cup's ward signature is wrong," Harry said. "I know. It's been modified," Hermione said. "They did not touch it." Harry produced a pre-set signal charm keyed to Sirius's mirror at Grimmauld Place and activated it, triggering the secondary response, Grimgold Ashbon, waiting at a ministry contact point with a prepared warrant for examination of tournament equipment under Sovereign House neutral zone provisions, filed the warrant within 30 seconds. Cedric Diggory, who had reached the maze's center 90 seconds after them and found them standing next to the cup doing nothing, looked at both of them. "Is something wrong with it?" Cedric said. "The activation signature has been modified. It's not going to take you to a scoring platform," Harry said. Cedric looked at the cup, He looked at Harry. "What is it going to take you to?" "Somewhere worse," Harry said. The maze lights came on. Ministry officials entered within 4 minutes, following the warrant's activation trail. The cup was examined. The modification was confirmed. An unauthorized portkey destination, substituted for the official one by Barty Crouch Jr., who had been operating outside ministry oversight since his escape from Azkaban some years prior, acting on behalf of his master's shade, trying to deliver the boy to a graveyard where everything was prepared. The cup's examination identified the destination. Bellatrix read the location the moment Ashbane's message reached the chateau, and felt the Seerstone's specific gravity pulling toward what it had always been building toward. She contacted Regulus. She gathered Sirius and Draco. She sent one message to Harry through the mirror. 3 words: "The time is now." Harry understood. He had understood for 2 years. He had understood since she sat him down at 9 years old and told him what lived in his scar and what had to happen to remove it. The graveyard outside Little Hangleton occupied a hillside that had been unremarkable for 3 centuries, and was unremarkable still. Yew trees, old stone, the specific quality of neglect that accumulated in places where no one had reason to come. At night it was dark in the way of places without ambient light, the kind of dark that had weight and texture, and was not merely the absence of illumination but its own presence. Bellatrix arrived first, with Draco and Sirius at her flanks, and took position in the yew trees on the northern edge. Regulus positioned himself at the eastern wall, with the silent efficiency of someone who has spent years learning how to be invisible. They had tracked Wormtail here through the magical signature on the modified portkey. Pettigrew's magic was identifiable if you knew what you were reading, and Bellatrix had known what she was reading for a long time. Harry apparated into the graveyard's center 5 minutes after they did, which was 5 minutes after Pettigrew had slipped through the maze's emergency exit and found the element of surprise he had been counting on missing. He arrived in the dark and stood still, and let his senses extend, reading the space with the unhurried attention of someone who is trained for exactly this kind of problem. "I know you're there," Harry said to the dark. "You're perceptive," a thin voice said from behind the largest headstone. "Your father was as well. It didn't save him." Pettigrew stepped into the open, carrying something in his arms. A pale, malformed thing that breathed and pulsed with the specific dark frequency Harry had known since he was 9 years old, the frequency that also lived in his scar. The twin resonance of 2 fragments of the same shattered soul. The ritual that followed was not what Pettigrew had planned, and was not precisely what Bellatrix had planned either, because plans at this scale do not survive contact with reality without modification. But the essential structure held. Pettigrew produced the cauldron. He began the incantation. Harry did not run. He stood still and allowed Pettigrew to take the blood. Because the blood was necessary. Because the blood was the mechanism. Because Harry's blood, carrying what his mother had left in it, entering Voldemort's reconstituted body along with flesh and bone, would create the paradox that was the only survivable ending to this story. Tom Riddle's new body anchored to Harry's continued existence by the magic of a woman who had loved her child absolutely, and had transformed that love into the most powerful protective force in the known wizarding world. Voldemort rose from the cauldron. The body was full-formed, the magical core reconstituted. The presence that had existed for 14 years as fragment and shade and parasite suddenly occupying space with the total conviction of something that has decided to be real again. He breathed. Steam from the cauldron moved around him in the dark air. He was exactly what he had always been: brilliant, cold, constructed, and incapable of fully understanding the distance between what he was and what he believed himself to be. He looked at the assembled Death Eaters, those few who had known, who had been summoned, who had come. He looked at the graveyard's perimeter. He looked at Harry Potter. He did not look at the yew trees on the northern edge. Bellatrix dropped from the sky without announcement. She arrived the way she always arrived, with the economy of someone for whom theatrics were a tool of people who needed to compensate for insufficient preparation. One moment she was not there, then she was standing at the graveyard center, gray robes settling around her, occupying the space the way a key occupies a lock, precisely, completely, without excess. The assembled Death Eaters registered her presence in the specific way of people encountering something their model did not account for. Voldemort turned. He looked at her with the red eyes that had once been the source of more fear in the wizarding world than anything else alive, and what moved through them was not surprise. He had burned surprise out of himself decades ago as an inefficiency. But the recalibration of a mind encountering a variable it had filed as resolved, and is finding unresolved. "Bella," he said. The voice was everything it had always been, high and cold, calibrated over decades to produce a specific response. She felt the weight of it. She noted the feeling, academically, and set it aside. "Tom," she said. The graveyard went completely still. No one called him Tom. This was not convention or formality, it was structural. The name Tom Riddle existed in the specific register of what he had chosen to leave behind, and hearing it spoken aloud in a graveyard in which he had just reconstituted himself was a different kind of blow than any curse she could have opened with. Several Death Eaters flinched. Lucius Malfoy's composure maintained itself through visible effort. She told him everything. Not to taunt him. Taunting was a tool of people who needed to demonstrate superiority because they were uncertain of it. She told him because the conversation was the plan, and the plan required him to arrive at the calculation she had arrived at 14 years ago. The Horcruxes, named and numbered, each one, with the calm precision of a woman delivering an inventory she has been preparing for a very long time. "The diary," she said, "is gone. The ring, secured under Goblin law. The locket, recovered from the cave, by the brother you thought dead, who has been alive since before I found him." She watched his face. "Regulus is alive, Tom. He survived the Inferi. He gave me everything he knew about your construction." She watched the calculation run behind the red eyes. "The diadem, destroyed. The cup, you know where it was, and you know it is no longer there." She let this assemble in the space between them. "Which leaves one," she said. "And you are looking at him." Voldemort looked at Harry, and in his face was the specific expression of a chess player who has just seen the board from above for the first time and found that the position he believed he held does not exist. "Only your curse can destroy it," Bellatrix said. "You know that. You built these things. You know what unmakes them." Harry stepped forward. He stood there, 15 years old and entirely himself, and looked at the man who had killed his parents with the specific quality of attention he used when he had made a decision and was implementing it. "The last fragment is in me," Harry said. "You put it there on the night you tried to kill me. The only thing that can remove it is the magic that created it, cast by the man who made it." A pause. "You used my blood. My mother's protection is in your body now. You cannot end what you have anchored yourself to. Cast it! The fragment will be destroyed. I will not stay dead." "And then this is finished." "Harry," Sirius said from the yew trees, very tightly. "It's the plan," Harry said. "It has always been the plan." Voldemort looked at this boy who had walked toward him rather than away, who had spoken with the absolute calm of someone who has been preparing for this specific moment for 2 years and has found, in the preparation, something that looks almost like peace. He looked at Bellatrix. Something passed across his face that occupied the register where admiration might have lived, in a different man, the specific response of a brilliant mind encountering a solution it finds. Against everything it wishes to feel, elegant, he raised his wand. Avada Kedavra. The green light crossed the graveyard. Harry fell. The fragment in his scar dissolved at the moment of impact, torn away by the magic that had created it, returning finally to the source that could unmake it. For a moment that lasted no duration at all, Harry was nowhere. The quiet that exists between one breath and the next. Not a destination, a door left ajar. He chose to come back. He came back because Lily Potter's protection lived in Voldemort's reconstructed blood, tethering Harry to existence with the same force that had kept him alive as an infant, when the universe had not yet determined whether love could be stronger than the most powerful curse ever devised. It had been. It remained. The paradox held. Harry stood up. Voldemort's face, in the moment Harry rose, was something that no one in that graveyard had ever seen on it, not in decades of terror, not in all the stories that had accreted around the name and the red eyes and the terrible patience. What moved across his face was the specific expression of a man who has just lost the last argument he believed he could make. He had nothing to fall back on. No fragment in an artifact, no anchor in a living vessel, no tether to existence beyond his own body, which breathed and was mortal, and had made a mistake it could not unmake. Bellatrix raised her wand. She did not say the incantation aloud. The Black family's oldest magic did not require it. It required only clarity of intent and the architectural depth of a magical core that had been built, over 30 years, into something that knew exactly what it was and had no ambiguity about it. The Exodus Maledictio left no room for interpretation. It had been in the family's restricted collection for 8 centuries and had never been used by anyone who was uncertain. She was not uncertain. Tom Riddle fell in a Muggle graveyard in the dark, as he had been born, alone and ordinary, stripped at the end of everything he had built to avoid exactly this. Not the magnificent terror, not the Dark Lord. A man with no anchors and no remaining architecture of survival, facing the irreducible fact that mortality had been waiting for him with the patience of things that do not need to hurry. He fell. The graveyard was quiet. The ministry officials arrived within minutes, following the warrant activation trail Ashbane had established. Wormtail attempted to flee and found himself between Regulus on one side and Sirius on the other, which was not a favorable position for anyone. The Death Eaters who had gathered in this graveyard tonight stood in it and made their calculations, and found that their calculations offered them nothing they would have chosen. Lucius Malfoy, who had come anyway and had watched the Dark Lord he had served for 20 years fall in front of him, made the calculation he had always been capable of making, and made it in approximately 4 seconds. He crossed to Bellatrix and knelt. "Aunt Bellatrix," he said, with the specific intonation of a man repositioning in real time, finding the available frame and occupying it with the practiced ease of someone who has been performing loyalty his entire adult life and has simply updated the direction. "Thank Merlin you've come." Bellatrix looked at him for a moment. The moment was very specific. It contained the full weight of what Lucius Malfoy was, had always been, and had demonstrated conclusively on this evening, a man of genuine intelligence and absolute moral flexibility, kneeling in a graveyard to the woman he had dismissed for a decade, because the woman now held what he needed. "Get up, Lucius," she said, with the precise contempt of someone who has found the response that is most accurate and most economical and therefore most devastating. "You're embarrassing, Draco." Draco's face was entirely neutral. He was making a visible and deliberate effort to maintain that neutrality. It was the effort, not the neutrality, that communicated everything. Lucius got up. Grimgold Ashbane arrived with a second team of witnesses, because Ashbane believed in documentation and had been waiting at the ministry contact point since before any of this began. The graveyard processed itself into record. Tom Riddle remained where he had fallen. The stars above Little Hangleton were very clear and entirely indifferent. Harry stood in the graveyard and looked at the sky. Bellatrix appeared beside him. They stood together without speaking in the way they stood together when there was nothing to say that was adequate to the situation. "It worked?" Harry said. "Eventually, yes," she said. The fragment is gone. Yes, he turned to look at her. You never, not once, gave me reason to doubt it would work. She looked at the stars rather than at him. I doubted it, she said. Every year. The plan had too many variables. But doubt is not the same as stopping. And the alternative futures were ash. I know, Harry said. You showed me the stone. He nodded once. Then it was worth it, he said. Whatever it cost. All of it. She said nothing, but she did not look away. The Death Eater trials began in autumn and ran through winter, which was the length of time required to do them correctly. This was new. The House of Black had spent years ensuring that this time would be different, which was the kind of preparation that is invisible until it is necessary, and then is everything. Grimgold Ashbane led the independent observation team. Every defendant had legal representation. Every piece of evidence submitted through documented channels. Every witness questioned under oath, with veritaserum offered and its voluntary acceptance or refusal noted for the record. The imperious defense, I was controlled, I had no choice, I did what I did because I was made to, was not available to people who had arrived in a graveyard at the summons of their own mark, in the presence of witnesses who had documented the arrival. Bellatrix testified with the organized precision of someone who has been preparing this testimony for years, and has ensured that every statement she makes is supported by documentation that predates this proceeding. She answered every question with the complete accuracy of someone who has decided that accuracy is the only form of testimony worth giving. Lucius Malfoy's legal team spent 6 weeks preparing a defense that dissolved, over 3 days of cross-examination, into a collection of circumstances and contexts and assurances of reluctance that the documented evidence did not support. He received 5 years in Azkaban, not the life sentence that the most egregious cases received, because Lucius Malfoy was careful, and careful men rarely produced the most egregious documentation. But 5 years was 5 years, and the Wizengamot's public record would carry his name alongside the verdict for the remainder of institutional memory. Draco learned of the sentence on a morning from the Daily Prophet, delivered to the Slytherin common room. He read it, set the paper down, went to breakfast and ate toast and discussed the upcoming transfiguration practical with Harry and Hermione in the specific way of someone who has processed a significant event and has determined that breakfast is the appropriate response to it. He did not discuss the sentence itself. They did not ask him to. The House of Black filed for formal recognition as a sovereign political entity in the following spring. The filing was 41 pages, the appendix another 30, and the argument was built on the same foundational logic as the Hogwarts Sovereign Neutral Zone Declaration. A house that predated the ministry was not subordinate to the ministry's permission to exist, but was willing to operate within the ministry's structures where doing so was productive, and outside them where it was not. The Wizengamot debated the filing for 3 sessions and approved it by 37 votes to 15. The House of Black became a recognized political entity under Wizengamot law. Neither ministry faction nor private family, but something older than both. With its own authority, its own legal structure, its own voice in the governance of magical Britain. Sirius took the Black family Wizengamot seat and proved a more effective politician than his temperament suggested. He lacked Bellatrix's architectural precision, but compensated with the social intelligence of someone who had spent years rebuilding severed relationships and discovered that human beings responded to being genuinely liked in ways that could not be produced by strategy alone. He liked people. This was genuinely useful. Bellatrix found it professionally interesting and personally baffling in equal measure. The platform produced 4 significant pieces of legislation across the following years. Magical education reform establishing what curriculum required independence from ministry interference and what could be regulated. The ministry could assess outcomes, not mandate content that served political purposes. Blood status documentation reform. eliminating the Muggle-born registry and removing blood status designation from all ministry employment applications. The 14 opposition votes were documented in the public record by Hermione's specific request. The record showed who had voted for what and when, because the record was the accountability structure. The Gringotts Accord, formalizing the Ministry-Gringotts working relationship as co-equal institutions rather than the implicit hierarchy that had operated for a century without legal basis. Ashbane attended the Accord signing ceremony. He wore his best hat. "That's what told me the Accord was correctly structured," Bellatrix told Harry afterward. "Ashbane doesn't wear his best hat for anything that can be appealed." And the establishment of the Creature Rights Legal Foundation as a formally recognized institution under Wizengamot charitable law, with standing to bring cases on behalf of magical beings who lacked the legal standing to bring cases for themselves. Hermione had been running it informally since 5th year. The formal recognition gave it subpoena authority. "That's what you always actually wanted," Draco said when the recognition was announced. "That's what I've always wanted," Hermione confirmed. "You used us as a legal vehicle to get there. I used all of us as a legal vehicle to get everywhere," Hermione said. "Including you. You're welcome." Draco had nothing to say to this. He was, privately, deeply satisfied. The chateau outside Lyon had become, in the years since 3 children had left it for a platform at King's Cross, something it had always been, and also something new. It remained a fortress. It remained a school. It had become headquarters, the informal center of whatever the Sovereign House was doing in any given week, the room where the work continued. Bellatrix was in her study on an autumn evening, the seer stone on the desk, the fire burning. Harry knocked and came in without ceremony, which was the habit of someone who has been entering this room for as long as he can remember and has never needed to announce himself. He sat in his chair, the one across from hers, worn to the shape of years of occupation, positioned at the angle that gave him the sightline he preferred. He was 16. He had been 16 for 2 months. He had, in the specific way of people who have been through things that most people do not experience and have integrated the fact without drama, a quality of presence that was not exactly age-related. "Sirius asked me something," Harry said. "Which question? Whether I resented any of it. The plan. Being the vessel for the last Horcrux. Walking into the curse in that graveyard." He looked at the fire. He wanted to know if I felt like I had a choice. Bellatrix was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted in the grate. "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him I had every choice," Harry said. "That you told me when I was 9. That you gave me the whole truth and then asked me what I wanted to do with it. That I said, 'Teach me everything I need to know,' and you did." He looked at her. "I told him that's what choice looks like when the person offering it actually respects you." She said nothing. The stone on the desk was quiescent, no futures pressing against its surface, no weight of accumulated probability pulling toward particular outcomes. She had never quite gotten used to the stone showing her open futures. It felt like silence in a room that had always had sound. "Does it bother you," Harry said, "when the stone goes quiet, when there's nothing specific to track?" "Yes," she said, "because you don't know what's coming, because I cannot prepare for what I cannot see. And preparation," she stopped, "is the only form of luck worth having," Harry finished. He had been hearing that sentence since he was 4 years old. "But maybe that's all right," he said. "Maybe the open future is what all the preparing was for. Not to produce a specific outcome, but to put us in a position where we can handle whatever the outcome is." She looked at him. He was 16, and he had his mother's eyes, and he was offering her something that no quantity of preparation had ever quite managed to provide. The specific comfort of being understood by someone who had been there for all of it and had the standing to say something true about it. "Possibly," she said. It was, from her, a significant concession. From below, through the floors of the chateau, the sounds of the house doing what houses do when they are genuinely inhabited, Draco's voice and conversation with Sirius's, a disagreement about something that sounded important to both of them. Hermione's footsteps on the stairs, moving with the focused direction of someone who has remembered something and is going to address it immediately. Regulus, somewhere in the kitchen, the specific sound of a person who has learned, years after he thought his life was over, that there are still small, ordinary pleasures to be had, and that they are not, on balance, insufficient. The Foundation filed its first precedent-setting case last Tuesday, Harry said, after a moment. I know. Hermione sent me the brief. She sent it to everyone, including Ashbane, who was already aware of it because he co-filed it. Yes, something passed across Bellatrix's face that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same register. The brief is excellent. She knows you think so, Harry said. You don't have to tell her. She sees your annotations in everything she writes. She's been watching you work since she was 6 years old. She knows what your approval looks like even when you don't display it. A beat of silence between them. Not empty silence. The kind that means something without requiring it to be named. The ring is still under Goblin's seal, Bellatrix said. It will remain there. The resurrection stone inside it. Yes, you've never been tempted by it. She was quiet for a moment. I considered it, she said, when your mother appeared in the stone's echo during the retrieval. For approximately 7 seconds. She looked at the fire. I set it aside. Because she would have been a shadow. Because she deserved better than a shadow, and so did you. A pause, and in it, something that cost her to say, and because I had you, and you were real. And a real person standing in front of you is worth more than any number of echoes. That is not sentiment. That is a fact about the value structure of living things. I know, Harry said. Good, she said. Outside, Lion was doing what it always did in autumn, golden and specific and entirely committed to its own concerns, indifferent to the long argument that magical Britain had just finished having with itself. The chateau's walls held. The wards held. Far to the north, in the drawing room at Grimmauld Place, the tapestry held too. No new burns, no new losses. The names that remained remaining. The family that had come back to itself still, improbably, intact. Harry didn't leave. He stayed in his chair and Bellatrix stayed in hers, and the fire burned lower, and neither of them needed to fill the silence, because the silence was not empty. It was full of everything still being built, everything not yet decided, the wide, complicated river of a future that was genuinely open. The stone on the desk showed nothing specific and therefore showed everything possible. Frightening, if you were someone who preferred to read the river before you entered it. But the river was there. And they were, all of them, still in it. That was enough. That had always been enough. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.